Welcome back to Cards and Comics. Today I want to talk about this topic of hobby regulation. This is something that's been going around a long time since I've been involved with the hobby. On the PSA boards, blowout boards, on YouTube, on Instagram, this topic always comes up when major events in the hobby, such as a trimming scandal, PSA scandals, anything that happens in the hobby that's very negative, people want to talk about regulation. Now, recently, Jeff Wilson did a video where he talks about regulation, but he kind of came to this idea of self-regulation may be the way to go for some things, but the hobby would have a hard time coming up with standard rules because no one can agree on what the actual rules should be because everyone has different viewpoints. So how do you get through all this, right, and determine what's good, what's bad? And I agree with him on that point. However, the one thing that has to happen for self-regulation to work is that you have to have a hammer at the other end of the process. And that is a regulatory agency that can actually impose fines or even jail time for people who don't comply. And I'm going to talk about something that I'm very familiar with, which is the National Advertising Division. Now, for people who don't know who I am, I have a master's degree in regulatory law. I do this all the time. I've actually been involved in multiple NAD cases in my lifetime and had to provide information, and it's not a fun process. And for people who don't know, also the National Advertising Division Review Board basically is a self-policing, self-regulation group that holds truth in advertising standards to basically anyone who's in the advertising world. If you advertise your products on TV, the news, magazines, whatever it is, you could be subject to NAD review. And it's really business to business. So the way this works is if you advertise something and one of your competitors thinks you're lying, thinks that you're not being truthful, they could request a review of your advertising by the NAD, and then the NAD may open a case against you, ask for information, ask for you to verify and validate your assumptions that were made in your advertising. And if you can't, they will recommend that you pull your advertising and even maybe pay penalties or fines, right? This process works really well for the advertising, let's say, community because companies voluntarily take part. And why do they take part in this process? Well, it's because of the hammer. If you go down to the, again, NAD challenges, you can do fast track, slow track, complex track, whatever it is, right? But why do people comply? Well, it says here that they're not, part of the government, they're part of the Better Business Bureau. However, if they say, when they send you a letter and you don't respond, the NAD will refer the matter to an appropriate regulatory agency, which is typically the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. They will issue a press release saying that they believe your advertising is false. They will then refer it again to the FTC, who then will take those referrals and assign them top priority, meaning that you're top of the pile for the next FTC lawyer to reach out. So that's a pretty big hammer. No one wants to have press releases saying that their advertising is false. No one wants to have the FTC call you. No one wants to get regulatory review. So generally, people take part in this process. If they lose, they change their advertising the way that's recommended by the NAD. If they win, they get to move on. And again, it's a process that takes money and time, but it's pretty much voluntarily because volunteer program that everyone usually takes part in because you don't want to get the hammer, which is the FTC. So this is an example of a program that's voluntary, and it works because of that hammer. Now, I want to talk about on the pivot side of this is the idea of that's causing some of these issues, right? So the two things that I see that could be harming the industry that would impose regulation onto the hobby is two things, right? First off is this idea of breaking when the breakers have no rules. They don't have any sort of insurance. They don't have any indemnification. They don't have anything, that requires them to, pay for something that that harmed you. They don't have anything out there that really protects the consumer. If they do something wrong, basically you either have to sue them, go to court yourself, and try to prove that they harmed you. And so it's all on you as a person, because there's no regulatory laws you can lean on to say this person violated some statutes, some regulations. So it gets very tough. And the one thing I wanted to show here is that breakers have no real rules. But if you get to like someone who's like, let's say, an auctioneer, right? Auctioneers sometimes have to go to class. They have to get a license. And if you look at the license requirements for Mississippi, it says here that they have to be at least 18 years old. They have to have a bond or insurance over $10,000. They have to be, every 2 years they have to take an exam. They have to renew a license. And so there's rules and requirements to be an auctioneer in the state of Mississippi. There's no rules or requirements to do breaking. Again, there's no requirement for insurance. There's no requirement for a binding contract. There's nothing to protect the person that's signing up for the break that allows them to hold the party responsible who did damage to them by either not delivering on the break, or if the break was, say, messed with so that they didn't get what they should have deserved. Those things can happen, and we've seen it happen in the breaking community. And so to me, this is going to push states, I think, to think about this idea of rules and requirements for people who engage in breaking. If I was Fanatics, one of the things I would definitely have in my terms of for these breakers is that they may need to carry insurance to help pay for mistakes in shipping, mistakes in the break. Just these ideas that if you create harm to me and my brand, I may sue you as Fanatics for causing harm to my brand, because I've got an online portal, an online community. I want to have people trust that my products are going to be broke on my channel in a way that's going to be honest and trustworthy. And if you break that trust, not only are we going to require you to make amends, but I may have to sue you to do that, and therefore I may require you to have insurance to pay for my lawyers that are going to sue you. And that's usually what happens here, right? So that's something I could see happening with breakers. Also, the fact that breakers are starting to break product that is worth so much money. Think about how much Flawless is worth today compared to even when it first came out. That amount of money is just tremendous for one person to handle, or a group of people to handle, and for them to not have any sort of safety net in case something goes wrong. I think that is something that these Fanatics, these companies are going to eventually require, is some level of, maybe you even have to be incorporated as a business, right? You have to be an entity. You can't just be some dude out of their basement breaking product for these companies, sort of like what we see on Whatnot, right? Some guy just in his living room breaking product. I'm not sure that's going to be the model we see in the future. So look at other areas that could really hurt the industry, that could cause actual regulation. One of the things I've talked about many times on the channel is gambling, right? And here's something that the FTC is warning consumers about: gambling and marketing gambling to children. And I've talked about this, but not a lot of people picked up on this, is that it's not allowed to basically advertise gambling to children. That is something that FTC is actually very worried about. And access to websites that have gambling is a no-no. FTC is, again, looking into it. And, they want to have warnings that, hey, if you go on this website and take part in this, you can lose money. You can ruin your credit rating. It can be addictive. And it's illegal for kids to participate in gambling, right? And again, they consider this to be a fraudulent, deceptive, and for a business practice. And the question that's going to come down to it is this. If breaking product is considered to be a form of gambling, and sometimes you get nothing for your break, right? Is Fanatics and these companies going to make it where you get something no matter what? That way, it does kind of skirt some of these rules around gambling, which basically means you either, which is all or nothing type of situations. I believe breaking is getting closer and closer to the definition of gambling every day. If you go to, another article from 2022, they talk about, gambling and stealth advertising to kids. Stealth advertising, is, I think, very prominent in the sports card market. We just saw where the biggest online gambling company just broke sports cards as part of their content. We saw where Fanatics bought an online gambling company. And if you don't think that those two companies are going to be intertwined, you're going to get advertisements to take part in gambling while breaking cards, and maybe you can credit from one thing to pay for something over here. I mean, it's getting very intertwined, sports cards and gambling, right? And so if you looked, through this, this, FTC white paper that was put out, they talk about, why it's bad, what's being done, and just how, they're protecting kids from, this idea of gambling becoming, let's say, legitimized through, other forms. And in this case, they're talking about, websites that can entice gambling. I'd be very, very interested to see how the FTC would view a company like Fanatics that has a gambling component and having their products on the largest gambling websites, sports gambling websites on the web. FTC's already looked into the idea of online gaming and getting loot boxes, right? So they've looked into whether or not pay to play in the gaming world is a form of gambling. So this is already a topic they're very familiar with. So just in conclusion is that we have to be careful as a hobby. So if you want to take some ownership of the hobby and think, I am part of this community, then you need to speak up and talk about, hey, look, I don't think it's okay that, gambling and the hobby are getting so intertwined, because that's going to lead to maybe regulation. It's going to restrict how we enjoy the hobby, how products are maybe even distributed in the hobby, and things that you can maybe even do with your product because of regulation. And it's happening because we're kind of intertwining things that may or may not go together, but the way that they're doing this, it's creating a lot of problems. So again, breakers kind of being rogue, doing their own thing, getting sued, states getting involved, local attorneys getting involved, local agencies getting involved. That'll turn into state agencies. State agencies will turn into federal agencies. People will look at this, and all it takes is one motivated congressman or senator who sees this and says, oh my God, kids are being corrupted. We got to stop this. And you'll see movement. So guys, I think we're a lot closer to regulation than we are away from it. I think we're moving the needle like in The Watchmen. The clock is getting closer to midnight on regulation if we don't start putting some things in place. And that's where that self-regulation piece comes in. But can we do it, right? Can we, as a group of people and hobbyists, decide what's best for us as a group, as a hobby, and not have the companies kind of spoil it and just do their own thing because they care about money? So that's really where we are. So let me know what you think in the comments, guys. I'll see you next time on Cards and Comics. Bye.